The ancient winds whispered through the crumbling ruins, carrying tales of gods and monsters long forgotten by mortal ears. Hidden among the twisted paths of time was a story both terrifying and sorrowful, the story of Medusa, a name that evoked both dread and fascination. But what most believed to be myth was a far more complex and haunting truth, obscured by shadows and shaped by betrayal, vengeance, and tragedy. Long before she was known as the Gorgon, Medusa was a radiant young woman who lived on the rocky shores of a vast and restless sea. Her beauty was unparalleled, her golden hair catching the sunlight like strands of molten gold, and her eyes shimmering with the clarity of an untouched sky. She was not born a monster, though the tales would later paint her as one. Medusa was mortal, a rare gift among the daughters of the sea god Phorcys and the oceanic goddess Ceto. Unlike her immortal sisters, Stheno and Euryale, Medusa's mortality made her both vulnerable and precious. Her days were spent tending to the temple of Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. The temple stood on a cliff overlooking the sea, its marble columns gleaming in the daylight. Medusa was a devoted priestess, her heart filled with reverence for the goddess she served. Pilgrims traveled from distant lands to gaze upon her beauty and seek the blessings of Athena, but Medusa remained humble, untouched by vanity. Yet beauty, as much as it is a blessing, can also be a curse. Word of Medusa's allure spread far and wide, reaching ears both divine and mortal. Among those who heard of her was Poseidon, god of the sea, whose temper was as volatile as the ocean waves. Poseidon was drawn to Medusa not for her devotion or virtue, but for the irresistible pull of her beauty. The god, who claimed dominion over all waters, was not accustomed to denial. One fateful evening, as the horizon blazed with the hues of sunset, Medusa stood alone in the temple, lost in prayer. The sea winds howled through the columns, carrying with them the salty scent of the ocean. She did not hear the approach of Poseidon until it was too late. The god appeared before her, a figure of immense power and arrogance. His eyes gleamed with a hunger that made Medusa's blood run cold. She backed away, her voice trembling as she pleaded for him to leave. But Poseidon was deaf to her pleas. In a moment of brutal force, he shattered the sanctity of the temple and claimed Medusa against her will. The sacred space, once a haven of peace and devotion, was desecrated by the god's violence. When it was over, Medusa lay broken on the cold marble floor, her tears mingling with the bloodstains that marred the temple's pristine surface. The winds carried her cries to the heavens, where Athena herself heard them. The goddess descended upon the temple, her eyes blazing with fury. But her wrath was not directed at Poseidon, the powerful god who had defiled her sacred space. Instead, it fell upon Medusa, the mortal who had been unable to protect the sanctity of the temple. Athena's voice was cold as she pronounced her judgment. "You have brought shame upon my temple," she declared, her words cutting through Medusa like a blade. "For this, you shall be punished." Medusa, weak and trembling, tried to speak, to defend herself, but Athena's mind was set. With a wave of her hand, the goddess unleashed a curse that would forever change Medusa's fate. Her golden hair, once the envy of all who beheld it, writhed and twisted into serpents, their scales glinting ominously in the dim light. Her eyes, once filled with warmth and innocence, became weapons of destruction. Any living creature that met her gaze would be turned to stone. The transformation was excruciating. Medusa's screams echoed through the temple as her body contorted under the weight of the curse. When the agony subsided, she collapsed onto the floor, her breath ragged. She reached up to touch her hair, only to recoil in horror as the serpents hissed and coiled around her fingers. Banished from the temple and shunned by the world, Medusa fled to a desolate island far from civilization. The once vibrant priestess became a figure of fear and legend, her name spoken in hushed tones by those who dared to remember her. She lived in solitude, her only companions the serpents that adorned her head and the statues of unfortunate souls who had crossed her path. Years passed, and Medusa's heart grew heavy with bitterness and sorrow. She longed for the days when she had been a devoted servant of Athena, when the world had not yet turned against her. But those days were gone, lost to the cruelty of gods and fate. Her island prison became a fortress of despair, its cliffs battered by relentless waves and its skies darkened by perpetual storms. Despite her isolation, Medusa's legend continued to spread. Warriors and adventurers, driven by greed and ambition, sought to claim her head as a trophy. They believed that slaying the Gorgon would bring them glory and favor from the gods. One by one, they ventured to her island, armed with swords and shields. And one by one, they fell, their forms forever frozen in stone. But destiny had one final twist in store for Medusa. Perseus, a young hero favored by the gods, was tasked with retrieving Medusa's head as part of a perilous quest. Armed with gifts from Athena and Hermes, a mirrored shield, winged sandals, and a sword forged by the gods, he set out for the island of the Gorgon. Unlike those who had come before him, Perseus did not rely solely on brute strength. He approached the task with cunning and caution. As he neared the island, the air grew thick with foreboding. The wind carried whispers of warning, and the ground was littered with the statues of fallen warriors. Perseus steeled himself, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that one wrong move would seal his fate. Guided by Athena's wisdom, Perseus navigated the treacherous terrain without meeting Medusa's gaze. He used the mirrored shield to track her movements, avoiding the deadly power of her eyes. Medusa, weary of countless battles and consumed by her own torment, did not notice the approaching threat until it was too late. In a swift and precise motion, Perseus brought down his sword, severing Medusa's head from her body. The serpents hissed one final time before falling silent. Blood, dark and thick, pooled around the fallen Gorgon. From her neck sprang the winged horse Pegasus and the giant Chrysaor, born of her union with Poseidon, a final, strange testament to her tragic fate. Perseus carefully placed Medusa's head in a sack, aware that its power remained potent even in death. As he soared away from the island on his winged sandals, he could not help but feel a pang of sorrow for the creature he had slain. Medusa, he realized, had been a victim of cruelty and injustice, her monstrous form a punishment for a crime she had not committed. The world would remember Medusa as a monster, her story twisted and distorted by the passage of time. But beneath the serpents and stone, she had been a woman, a priestess, a survivor, and a symbol of resilience against the whims of gods and fate. And though her tale had ended, the echoes of her tragedy would linger, carried on the winds that whispered through the ancient ruins, reminding all who listened that even monsters have stories worth telling. Thanks for watching. For more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to get the updates. Also, like and share this video.